I want to introduce you to Bridget Sampson. Her pronouns are she and her, and she's the CEO and founder of Sampson Coaching and Consulting. She has such a varied pedigree of skills that she gets to use really to advance the cause and support people in whatever forum she chooses. And so she is a retired professor of communication studies at CSUN. She's an author. She's a TEDx speaker. She's a certified coach. She's the creator and co-founder of Transgender School with her daughter, Jackie. And they really have launched in 2020 to promote LGBTQ plus education and advocacy. And so Bridget, in her free time, has been featured on CNN, on ABC as a trans rights advocate. And she has a podcast. There's a Facebook group that they, with Transgender School, keep updating. She's part of Transforming Family, the support groups that happen in Los Angeles once monthly. She is the creator of a 90-minute course that you can purchase or rent that I was speaking to earlier, called Transgender Support, How to Be a True Ally. And that, I think, will be exploring parts of all of her body of work this evening. And I just want to say that Bridget and I met at each of our first support group meeting. The first time that I sought out support for my family many years ago, I had the honor of meeting Bridget, and it was her first meeting as well. And so I feel a sense of kinship from just being first timers together. We became fast friends. So without further ado, Bridget, please just take us through what you've prepared for us this evening.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
As you introduced me, my sound switched to my AirPods. Like something wanted to, to have me pause for a moment. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Isabelle. And it's such an honor to be here. And it's so lovely to see you and to remember that first meeting. And my goodness, how much has changed since then.
Mm-hmm.
And with everything that Isabelle shared in introducing me, it sounds as if I'm doing, a lot of work around educating people and, and getting the word out about how to be an ally and how to support transgender people. But really, I could relate most in all of what's been said so far to what Stephen and I think his partner, I think her name was Michelle, is that right? We're saying about how we think we're getting it right, and then we find out that there's some aspect that we're not getting right about it, right? And we are very blessed, many of us, to have kids, adult kids, or even young kids who teach us every single day. I think new information about what it means to truly be supportive, to truly understand as much as we can if we are cisgender. Not all of us here are cisgender, but those of us who are know that it's a lifelong journey of working to understand on a deeper level what our kids experience and how we can support them, and what all of the transgender people in our lives experience and how we can support them. So I am so happy to be here tonight, and my journey is almost at 5 years at this point. My daughter Jackie came out on March 4th of 2017. So I actually didn't get myself to a support group meeting until about 10 months later, which I now think I don't know what took me so long, because you are so wise to be here, and I am so reliant on my support group, Transforming Family, for continuously learning and growing and finding new ways to support my child and to support our community of people who want to learn. And I want to share some things. It's holiday season. I love Kathryn, and those of you who have your Margie, your holiday spirit in full force of the screen. I thank you for that, because it's a beautiful time of year. And for a lot of us, it's a challenging time of year. In our support group, a lot of families have been talking about tensions and anxieties around getting together and fears of people misgendering kids, family members, fears of people getting the pronouns wrong. People have been talking about family members who simply aren't going to be attending gatherings because they're too fearful of what's going to happen, or because not everyone knows that someone has come out. And so it's a really important time, I think, for us to explore what we can do the best we can to use affirming language, to be mindful of the many different experiences and perspectives of transgender people. So when I speak about this topic, I really like to say that I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my daughter and many of the people I've been lucky enough to interact with. We have a podcast, we do a lot of interviews, and we talk with a lot of folks. So I'm sharing that, but that doesn't mean it's true for everyone. So I really would love to encourage you to challenge me or say I feel differently about that. If you are a trans person, especially, say, well, I feel this way, or this is my experience. If you are a parent and your child tells you something different than what I'm saying, please speak up or put it in the chat. Let's bring everything to the surface. But the nice thing about my daughter Jackie that's been really helpful for me is that she's very, very outspoken, and that's not true about everyone. So she has been incredibly vocal and verbal and confident about telling me and telling the world what she needs to feel supported and to feel affirmed, and as a trans person, what her journey is and all of the stages that she's gone through in that journey. And so I've been incredibly blessed and lucky to be able to not only have these conversations with her in public, but in private, but in public. I've had the conversations in private, and as well, she's been willing to bring them to the public. And so I'm incredibly grateful for that. So that's me. I'm going to talk about an acronym that Jackie and I came up with together. And the acronym is, no surprise, ALLY, which stands for Affirm, Listen, Love, and Yield. And we talk about it in great depth in our video on Vimeo, which is, I think it's vimeo.com/transally, where you'd get to hear a lot more. Well, you'd get to hear a lot from Jackie, not more. You're not really going to get to hear from her tonight. She's very busy with work, but she would have loved to be here. But she shares a lot about what it really means to her to be an ally, and what it means to her community of transgender friends and colleagues that she has consulted with to come up with some recommendations for all of us. And I'll share some highlights from that, and I'd love to know what questions you have about it. And I think it's a great framework or foundation or model for us to also share with other people and to check in with trans people in our lives about how they feel about it, and do they agree with these recommendations. So to start with affirm. So when Jackie and I talk about what it means to be affirming, I'll start with what I didn't do when she first came out. I, unfortunately, like many of you, have talked about wanting to be supportive from the get-go, and that makes me so happy and it gives me so much hope. I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning, and I was not affirming. I did not follow this guideline to the extent that I now realize is so important, and in many cases can be life-saving. So I said things like, could this be a phase? Are you sure? Are you sure it's not your sexual orientation that you really are talking about exploring? I challenged Jackie. I tried to slow her down and tell her that she should think about it more and gather more information before making choices such as going on hormones. So all of that I now realize is what we would put in the category of being non-affirming. Non-affirming. Being affirming means affirming everything that the person requests, says, expresses, feels, without exception. And so in the almost 5 years that I've been learning from Jackie, and we've been having these conversations, we've been talking with people in our communities, I've learned that there's no exception to this, that affirming means immediately using someone's pronouns, and also not calling them preferred pronouns, but just calling them their pronouns. Jackie's pronouns are she, her, hers. They are not preferred. They are not chosen. They're simply her pronouns. And so these are some of the things that she's taught me about, really, really honing the language choices, and really thinking about the meaning, the deeper meaning for a trans person, at least for her, and using her name. Jackie, not all transgender people make this request, but for my daughter Jackie, and for many of the transgender people that we know, Jackie does not want me to use what she refers to, and some people don't like this, but I'm sharing her experience. She refers to her name that I gave her at birth as her dead name. She does not want us to ever speak it in reference to her, and so we don't. So I haven't spoken that name in years unless it's someone else's name. So those are some examples of being affirming. More recently, Jackie's shared, and she shared this on our last podcast, which was called Allies, Adversaries, and Everything in Between, Transgender Allies, Adversaries, and Everything in Between. It's episode 12. She shared that for her, as she's sort of grown on her journey and become more of an activist and an advocate, that it matters more to her, or I shouldn't say it matters more. It matters a lot to her to know that people are advocating for her and that cisgender people are advocating for her and other transgender people, even when they're not around. That being a true ally, and even moving from ally to advocate, means that when a cisgender person is in a room full of only other cisgender people, and someone does anything from misgendering someone to simply like a snide remark about, oh, using they, them is so hard, it's grammatically incorrect, right? That the person who's a true ally will call that person out and speak up and say, no, it's not grammatically incorrect, and we need to use people's pronouns and respect who they are. And so these are some of kind of the things that she's constantly teaching me, is advocating for affirming language 100% of the time, regardless of who's present. Things like, she talked in that podcast episode about how she considers things like putting she, her in our name on Zoom, in our little square on Zoom. She thinks that's great, but she thinks that's a really simplistic, easy kind of performative way to signpost that we're allies, versus when we're in settings where it's uncomfortable to speak up. If we don't, then we're not really being an ally. And so I find that really challenging, because I don't always speak up every time in every situation, and I'm pushing myself to do so more and more, and to be affirming not only with the person, but when they're not there as well. So that's the A, affirming. And there's so much more to it. As I said, we have all these podcast episodes and courses and things that we've done. And she's taught me so much about it, but I think you get it. I know you get it. I know you understand, but like me, some of you shared that you're constantly working on learning more and going deeper with all of this, and getting better and better at it, and understanding more. And so I think that being affirming is a lifelong journey. I don't think we ever get there. And Jackie will tell you, oh yeah, my mom will say something, and I'll have to tell her that that's not, that's not the way I would like her to say that, or I would prefer for her to say something in a different way, and she'll tell me. So that's affirming. Any questions or feedback on that? Oh, how old was Jackie? Thank you. Good question. Jackie was 19 when she came out. She's 24 now. So she's been transitioning all during that time. And her journey of transition continues. So she's not there where she'd like to be. She has further steps on her journey, and I'm learning along with her in that process. So affirming language 100% of the time. Yes. And thank you for putting that in the chat. So listen. So the others are kind of, I think they build on that, right? So listen. When Jackie first came out, I was not a good listener, which is really ironic, because I was a communication studies professor for 28 years, and I literally taught courses on being a good listener and active listening skills, and did listening exercises. And when Jackie came out, it was such a shock to me. I felt that it was so unexpected and so jarring and not something I had ever really considered or prepared myself for, that I had a hard time listening, even though I really want to be a good listener. She came out at 19. I felt at the time that I had no signs that as Jackie was growing up, it felt to me as though she presented very masculine, as a very masculine person growing up. And now I realize that those are all just gender stereotypes and all the things that made me believe that she was male. And by the way, affirming language is to say that I believed that she was male. She was never male. She was a woman. She was a girl when she was in, from conception, from the moment, that she was a tiny cell, always female. And that's the only language we use. So if my partner, Neil, her father, and I talk about her as a baby or when I was pregnant with her, it's always she. She was always female. And that's part of our affirming language. But I bought into those gender stereotypes. And so when she tried to tell me, I'm a woman, I've always known this about myself, it was really hard for me to listen and just hear that. I talked too much. I needed to bite my tongue. If I could go back, I would bite my tongue. I would not have said anything other than, thank you for trusting me. How can I support you? Can you tell me more? Another thing I've learned, and I've learned this a lot from my support group and the professionals. We have a wonderful professional therapist, Aiden Olson Kennedy, who's also a transgender male, and he was on our podcast as well. And one of the things that he's really reinforced is that even though we want to listen, we can't force the transgender person to explain everything to us. There's a great deal of emotional labor that goes into sharing your personal, private journey. And if you experience gender dysphoria and distress, and to have to explain that and justify that we look to our kids when we're parents that, like, I want to understand, tell me. And maybe that's not their obligation. Maybe it's our obligation as parents to seek that information out elsewhere. If our kids want to talk with us about it, if they open up to us, that's a gift, and all we can do is listen and affirm. If they don't want to talk to us, we have to respect that. And with Jackie and myself, she's been mostly open about a lot of things, and there are some things that she doesn't want to talk with me about, and I've pushed on that and I've made her uncomfortable, and I now regret that, and I apologize to her for that, and I just listen to whatever she shares. And if she doesn't want to share, I honor that and I respect that, and I am grateful that she's made her boundaries very clear. But I also regret and feel bad about, and now apologize to her about pushing those boundaries and not hearing her more clearly that, yes, she wanted me to listen, but if there were certain areas that she didn't feel comfortable talking about, I needed to listen to her saying that as well. So that's affirm, that's listen. Listening is the most important thing we can do when someone comes out, when they choose to share, if they choose to share. Any questions or thoughts about that? Thank you, Isabelle. Yes, we can't force the transgender person to explain. It's not their job, even if they're our child. And also, they may not know. Like, looking back when Jackie first came out, for some reason I expected her to know everything about being transgender. She was just discovering herself. She's still discovering herself. So a lot of the questions I had and the questions I peppered her with, she didn't know how to answer. And some of them she still doesn't know how to answer. So that listening is something that we engage in, if we are lucky enough for someone to share. And if they don't share, they may never share, and they may be figuring out what and how to share, and we need to honor that as well. So the third letter of our acronym ALLY is love, and there's not a lot to say about that, except that many parents have shared with me that when their kids came out, they came from a place of fear rather than love. And a lot of their challenges and their questions and their doubts and their lack of affirming behavior was out of fear, not love. And I think that when we act from love, when we come from love, we make better choices. So it's remembering the love we have for our children, whoever it may be in our life, who may be transgender. Um, our love for them will lead us to being affirming, to listening, and to providing the support that's needed. I think I saw a hand up. Kathryn, did you have a question or something to share? Did I see your hand up? Please.
Yes, I did have my hand up. Just, a couple of things that you've mentioned. I don't know whether you want us to talk about it now or you want to wait and have discussion
Yes,
afterward.
please.
In terms of listening, a lot of people in our community, the trans people, want you to listen to them. They have all the answers. They're going to tell you. I always tell people, and I facilitate groups, you have to listen to the other person too, especially parents who are trying to understand what's going on. So listening is a two-way street. And as you well know, in communication, the most important part of communicating is listening. So I think that, we have to look at that too. And the whole issue of transitioning, everybody's transitioning. We all are. I've often said I don't like the term transgender because I never changed my gender. I changed how I look. And you were, what you said, she knew she was female from the time probably she birth. I knew from 3 years old. It's, and the final thing I wanted to say, I'd love to talk to you more about this, but certainly, so we transition our whole life, but this isn't the only part of me. And I think parents need to understand that too. There's so much more to me than my gender, the same as you. How often do cis people sit around and talk about their gender? They don't. And I find the same. And with my friends who have transitioned, quite a while ago, and when I did, we go out, we don't talk about being trans, we talk about things in our lives and all of that sort of stuff. So I know for younger people, it's a huge thing in their life, and I understand that. But I think it's important to also say, that's not the only part of your life. What are some of the other things that are of interest to you, where you're going, what's happening? So I'm sorry to jump in there, but I think I want to do that. The other small thing is I don't like the term dead name. I think to me, it's telling my parents, you didn't know me when I was born, but they did, and that was the name they chose for me, and I was happy. And again, I'm looking at it from an older perspective, and I understand younger people have different perspectives than I do, and I do listen to them. But anyway, so those are just some comments that I had on where you are, what you said so far.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. I think everything you shared is so, so important. And I would want to talk to you so much more about all of it, but I think it's so important. And I think I agree with everything you said. And it's so important to hear all the different perspectives. And that's why I know whenever I say dead name, I preface like, I know a lot of people just can't stand the word and the idea. And that's why I'm sharing from Jackie's perspective. And I do think age makes a big difference. I think that I appreciate you saying we need to listen to parents too, because, we make mistakes and we're trying and, and we have a hard time and we need to be heard as well. And I think that a lot of us have been in situations where it's compounded a bit by the fact if our kids are teenagers, right? Because we know that teenagers are going through a lot in general and all kinds of hormonal changes and things. And so if your child is transitioning and they're also a teenager or just, preteen, whatever it is, that they might not have the capacity, they might not have the cognitive maturity, whatever it may be, to be able to listen to us. So it really depends on we have to be adaptable and we have to read the signs and figure out what's gonna keep us connected and allow us to be loving and supportive based on where our child is at that stage. So I would love for everyone to be able to have that listening and understanding and empathy and compassion be completely reciprocal. And I think we have to also be mindful of developmental stages, right, of life. Yeah. So I completely appreciate your perspective on that. And so the last letter, and I wanted to say more about everything you said because it's so important and brilliant, but I'll give you the last letter, and then if we can talk more, any other questions, please let us know. Yield. That's it. You got to yield. It's the transgender person's life. It's their body. Even as our parents, I was thrilled to hear, I don't remember who, I think was it TJ said, your trans son is going on puberty blockers. Oh my goodness. I've had so many conversations with parents about, puberty blockers are a pause button. They're reversible. It's so important for young people. Jackie will tell you and has said many times she would give anything to go back and not have to go through the wrong puberty, but it wasn't safe for her. We didn't talk about it to a point where she was able to understand and articulate that she was transgender before she went through the wrong puberty, male puberty, right? So yielding just means whatever the trans person needs, medical intervention is absolutely necessary and required. It is not optional. It's covered by health insurance. It is, just like any other medication that anyone might need for anything in their life. So yield is just yield, just like affirming 100% of the time. We yield 100% of the time. And that can be really hard for parents because we feel like our children are a part of us, but they're not. They are their own person with their own body and their own needs. And so we've got to yield 100%. And I did not do this. I challenged Jackie. We had many conversations. She wanted to go on hormone replacement therapy right away when she transitioned. And I said, just wait, you're not sure. It's not reversible, And she explained to me that if she were a cisgender male who were to go on estrogen and suppress testosterone, a cisgender male would be depressed and lethargic and, have a hard time functioning. On the other hand, a transgender woman who goes on hormone replacement therapy usually feels better and feels like her true self. And that's what happened for Jackie. And she finally felt like her gender dysphoria was, managed with the medication that she absolutely needed to bring her body into alignment with her female identity, which she knew she was in her mind, her heart, her being. So yielding is also required. So it's affirm, listen, love, and yield. And that goes for us as parents. It's something we can easily teach others. It's an acronym, easy to remember. We talk a lot more about it in our video and in our courses and our Patreon membership, but I wanted to at least introduce you to that. So thank you so much for listening and your open minds and hearts, and you're all doing an amazing job in your community and your organization to provide support for our LGBTQ family members, loved ones, friends, colleagues, and I thank you for that.
Thank you so much for just doing such a great job at walking us through your acronym and giving us really like a good framework to be able to work with. One of the things that I will just put in the chat just now, and I put in the chat notes just a few of the nuggets of what you've shared. I will put in there a link to an article that came out, a study that was done on gender affirming hormone therapy, a study that was just done, and how it was said that 40% of the participants really showed a significant reduction or alleviation in any kind of suicidal ideation, self-harm by obtaining gender-affirming hormone therapy. Even sometimes simply consulting with a gender specialist or a gender-affirming therapist can really help the person just feel as though they are heard, they're being supported, and that we are providing that type of support, and we're encouraging it. So in connecting them to either the right resource, so that can be really helpful.
That's great. Thank you, Isabelle. I'm going to check that out and share it in our community. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And actually kudos to Frank, who's joining us this evening, because he's the one who shared the study with us earlier this week. And so I really appreciate it. It's kind of like that too, is that when you were speaking earlier about listening and the fact that it's a two-way street, is that it's a more than a two-way street, is that there's many ideas or many nuggets that can come from different places, and it's to really take them in and take the time to look at them and see if they in fact are affirming and are correct, and then moving forward with them and sharing them.